Okay, in this first video of the ShipCore learning series, we're going to learn how to build, deploy, and run your first ShipCore automated test. So this video assumes that you've already downloaded the ShipCore SDK. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and click the documentation link on your ShipCore instance and download that zip file, extract it locally so you can follow along with the tutorial. Okay, let's get to it. Okay, after you've extracted the ShipCore SDK zip file, you should have a directory structure on your local computer that looks a little bit like what you see on the screen. You'll notice that there's this libs directory in there. That holds the ShipCore SDK jar file, and then feel free to add any other jar files that you use typically that you want to use in your tests to develop. For instance, I use Log4j and Selenium quite a bit, so I added those to my libs directory. But add anything you want to that libs directory as far as jar file is concerned, and ShipCore will automatically add it to your class path, so you'll be good to go. You'll also notice this run.sh file. It's a simple shell script that we'll get to in a minute, and at least one Java source file. In our case, we're going to go over a file called simple. The only difference here is if you're using a Windows to develop, you'll see a run.bat file, a batch file, but it serves the same purpose as run.sh and it's used exactly the same, so just swap that out if you are a Windows developer. Okay, let's get to simple.java and I'll show you exactly how to structure a ShipCore automated test. So what you see here when we open up simple.java is the basic structure of a ShipCore test. At the top here you can see that we've imported the ShipCore SDK and Java util. Each test also have to implement the com.shipcore.sdk.i ShipCore interface. That's pretty much the only limitations that the class file has. Feel free to import anything else you need. You'll notice that there's three methods here: execute, get description, and get inputs. I'm going to skip execute just for a second and get down to the bottom two just to get those out of the way. Get description is required for every class, and this simply returns a string explaining what the test does. There are certain places in the ShipCore dashboard, for instance, where this will help people find the test that they're looking for. So put a simple one-sentence description in there to give other people a chance to find it. And the second method here, get inputs. ShipCore provides an API so you can add runtime inputs to tests. For instance, if you want to run a test against both a development environment and a production environment, you may want to pass a different IP address in, depending on what environment you're pointing towards. So get inputs provides that sort of facility. For this video, we're going to leave that null, so we're not going to take any inputs into this particular test. See the next video that covers more advanced topics like getting inputs and logging and a few other topics. But for right now, we just want to keep it as simple as possible, so we're going to just return null from that method. Okay, so let's get to the execute method. The first thing you'll notice is that the method returns an array list of these things called test result objects. Now, what that is this is the methodology you'll use to return information back to the ShipCore dashboard, so it can be logged, you can do reporting, people can get notifications of test fails, that type of thing. Excuse me. So the first thing we're going to do is set up an array list of those test result objects. Now you might wonder why an array list instead of just a single test result. In some more sophisticated tests, you may want to return more than one test result from a specific test. For instance, if your test logs into a website and then clicks on a link, and those are two distinct actions that you want to measure or assert, you may want to return multiple test results. But in most cases, you'll just return a single test result, as you'll see in just a second. Since we're only going to return one test result from this example, I'm just going to go ahead and set up that object right here. So this is going to be the test result we'll return from our logic, our test logic. Now, clearly your test logic is going to be more complex than this, but for the sake of demonstration purposes, I'm just going to do a simple test here. And you can see, oops. Excuse me. So you can see here, what I'm testing here is just if the number 1 is less than the number 2. Now obviously your tests are going to be more sophisticated than that, but what I'm trying to get across is how you do assertions and return results back to the framework. So you can see if 1 actually is less than 2, what we'll do is we'll assign a test result to our object here. And that test result takes 2 parameters. It's a constant, whether the test passed or failed, and then some sort of simple string that you can define appropriately for your test. If the test was to fail, the only difference is we'd use a different constant here when we set up our test result object. So finally, we just need to tell the framework what happened. So what we're going to do here is add this object, our test result object, to the test result array list that we have to return back to the framework. And then here, we're just returning that array list that we defined up here back to the framework. So what I've done here is jump over to my command line, and I just want to run, and well, first compile and then run the test that we just developed, just to make sure it works the way we think it's going to. That's where the run.sh file comes into use. Simply run just like that. And because the name of the test we designed was called simple.java, we just passed the word simple in as the first and only parameter. So, not very interesting, but what happened right there is the ShipCore SDK compiled that class file, added any jar files that we had in the libs directory to the class path, and executed our simple test. So it looks like it did what we expected it to do. Now it's time to put it on the ShipCore instance so anybody else can run it through the UI. So I've logged into my instance of the ShipCore dashboard and selected the Define New Job link underneath the Test Jobs navigational menu selection. It's over on the left-hand side. Okay, we're going to define a new job so we can run the test that we just developed. I'm going to call it QA Smoke Tests. Obviously, give a descriptive job name depending on the nature of your tests. I'm going to add a description here. This is optional, but it's nice to help other people understand what these tests are all about. Something like that. Now, under result notifications, you can choose to get results of this test when it finishes. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And under lab machine, most of the time we're going to run things locally. ShipCore has the ability to run tests geographically distributed, so I have a Windows server here that's over in Japan. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to use the local agent. Press save and continue. Now you can see that ShipCore has identified this new test that we've developed and shown it right here. We only have one test here, so there's only one showing, but normally you'd have tens or dozens of tests here after you've been developing them for a while. I'm going to go ahead and choose our simple test and press the save and continue button. ShipCore will now compile that test just to make sure that the test compiles properly. Now, since we use the run.sh file to make sure that the test compiled properly before adding it to ShipCore, we knew everything was going to go okay. And as you can see, it did. The final step is to press save and finish. Now that job definition has been saved to the ShipCore, and it can be run anytime by anybody. So I'm going to go ahead and run it now. ShipCore will start to initialize the test and begin running it. You can see up here the job is now running. And shortly here, under test results, once the test completes, we'll get the result of our test. You can see the name of our, the result of our test was successful, and ShipCore is completed. Some information about it here. You can use this permanent link right here displayed. It'll say something like yourcompany.shipcore.com. So that permanent link will be mailed to you as well at the end of the test. You can also choose to look at the health report for this particular test. At this point, so we've only run one test. This is the first time we've run it. The health report looks pretty good. It's all green. But over time, this report will show you sort of the health trends of whether or not the test is failing or succeeding more frequently. So that's a really good measure. We'll get into that in a future video. Okay, that wraps up video 1 of the ShipCore learning series. I hope you found that informative. I would recommend visiting the documentation link of your ShipCore instance to find some more detailed information. And also keep an eye out for video 2, where we'll go into some more advanced techniques such as defining user inputs and doing some more advanced logging. So keep an eye out for that, and thanks for using ShipCore.